At first glance, a forest can appear almost silent, a collection of trunks standing motionless beneath a ceiling of leaves. A landscape so familiar that the human mind often files it away as background scenery. But deep within that quietness, hidden beneath bark, soil, mist, and shadow, forests are performing some of the most intricate biological conversations on Earth. Even now, somewhere in the northern forests of Canada, roots are exchanging nutrients in complete darkness. In the rainforests of Brazil, insects are navigating by moonlight through layers of warm air thick with the scent of wet leaves. High in the ancient cedar forests of Japan, droplets of fog are gathering on needles before falling softly onto moss that may be older than entire human civilizations. And in almost every forest on Earth, trees are breathing together. A mature forest does not inhale and exhale like an animal, yet in another sense, it absolutely does. During the day, forests absorb enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, quietly reshaping the chemistry of the atmosphere. At night, the rhythm changes. Respiration slows, temperatures fall, moisture rises from the ground like invisible smoke. Entire valleys begin to cool beneath the canopy while leaves continue their microscopic exchanges with the air. To walk into a dense forest at night is to enter a different kind of clock. Human beings evolved alongside these environments for millions of years. Long before cities, before agriculture, before language fully formed into stories and laws, forests shaped the nervous system of our species. Some researchers believe this is part of the reason many people feel an immediate sense of calm beneath trees. The effect appears measurable. Heart rates often slow, stress hormones decrease, attention becomes softer and less fragmented. The Japanese practice known as forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, emerged from this observation. Not exercise, not hiking with a destination, simply existing among trees with full sensory awareness. Scientists studying the practice discovered subtle physiological changes in participants after only short periods within wooded environments. Blood pressure shifted, anxiety levels lowered, even immune activity appeared to change. But perhaps the deeper question is why forests affect the human mind so profoundly in the first place. One possibility is scale. Forests surround us with patterns too large to fully comprehend and too detailed to completely process. The branching of limbs resembles river systems, lightning bolts, blood vessels, and even galaxies. Ferns repeat mathematical structures known as fractals, where shapes echo themselves across different sizes. A single patch of moss may contain thousands of tiny architectures invisible from standing height. The brain seems to relax in the presence of these repeating natural patterns, not because they are simple, but because they exist in a balance between order and unpredictability. Leaves move with the wind, but never in exactly the same way twice. Light filters through branches in endlessly shifting arrangements. Nothing is perfectly symmetrical, yet almost nothing feels chaotic. A forest is complexity without aggression, and perhaps that is why ancient forests can feel strangely sacred, even to people with no spiritual tradition attached to them. There are forests on Earth today that began growing before some modern nations existed. The old-growth temperate rainforests of Chile and the towering redwood groves of California contain trees that were already centuries old when medieval castles were still being constructed in England. Some coast redwoods can grow taller than 350 feet, placing their highest branches beyond the height of a 30-story building. Yet remarkably, scientists still do not fully understand all the ecosystems hidden within their upper canopies. Entire communities of insects, lichens, salamanders, and miniature gardens exist suspended high above the forest floor, nourished by fog and trapped organic material. In certain seasons, these giant trees create their own weather. Fog drifting inland from the Pacific Ocean condenses against redwood needles and slowly drips downward, providing water to the forest below even during dry periods. The trees are not merely adapting to the climate around them, they are partially shaping it. This ability of forests to influence their own environment exists on astonishing scales. The Amazon rainforest releases immense quantities of water vapor into the atmosphere through transpiration. Billions upon billions of leaves continuously emit moisture, helping generate atmospheric rivers that travel across continents. Some climatologists describe the Amazon as a kind of biological engine, recycling water through air currents in cycles so vast they can influence rainfall thousands of miles away. A forest, in other words, is not simply growing in the world, it is actively helping create the world around it. Yet much of this activity happens beyond ordinary human perception. Trees grow slowly enough that their movements appear frozen. A branch reaching towards sunlight may take years to noticeably change position. Roots advance through soil grain by grain, bark thickens almost invisibly. But when researchers began using time-lapse photography, forests revealed themselves differently. Seedlings twist toward openings in the canopy. Vines spiral upward in searching motions. Sunflowers track daylight across the sky. Tree crowns subtly reposition their leaves hour by hour to maximize energy collection. Beneath the apparent stillness lies constant motion. Even communication exists there, though not in the way humans once imagined. For centuries, trees were often described as isolated organisms competing against one another for sunlight and space. But modern ecology has uncovered relationships far more interconnected. Underground fungal networks, sometimes called mycorrhizal networks, link the roots of multiple plants together through thread-like filaments thinner than human hair. Through these fungal partnerships, trees can exchange nutrients and chemical signals across surprisingly large distances. A shaded seedling may receive carbon compounds from a larger neighboring tree. Warning signals about insect attacks can trigger defensive chemical changes in nearby plants. Forests are not conscious societies in the human sense, yet they are also not collections of disconnected individuals. They are systems of exchange, and strangely, the language of those exchanges often resembles cooperation more than competition. This becomes especially fascinating in older forests, where towering mature trees sometimes support younger generations beneath them for decades. Scientists studying these relationships noticed that large mother trees appear deeply connected within underground fungal networks, sharing resources with surrounding seedlings in patterns that improve overall forest resilience. It is a reminder that survival in nature is not always driven by dominance alone. Sometimes endurance emerges through quiet interdependence. In the darkness beneath the soil, roots and fungi are conducting slow transactions every second, transferring minerals, water, sugars, and biochemical information through living pathways formed over centuries. Above them, owls move almost silently through layers of cold air. Beetles tunnel through decaying wood, returning nutrients to the ground. Fungi bloom overnight like pale lanterns after rainfall. And everywhere, decomposition continues its patient work. In human culture, decay is often treated as destruction. But forests reveal another perspective. Fallen trees become habitats. Rotting logs hold moisture for seedlings. Dead leaves transform into fertile soil through armies of microorganisms invisible to the naked eye. Even death within a forest rarely feels final. It feels transitional. A single fallen tree can support entire worlds. Nurse logs, as ecologists call them, often become elevated gardens where mosses, mushrooms, insects, and young saplings flourish together. In especially wet forests, rows of trees sometimes appear growing in straight lines because they originally sprouted from the same long-decayed fallen trunk centuries earlier. The forest remembers through growth patterns, and sometimes those memories survive far longer than human history itself. In some forests, the ground beneath your feet contains traces of climates that no longer exist. Buried layers of pollen, trapped in mud and lake sediment for thousands of years, allow scientists to reconstruct ancient worlds with astonishing precision. By examining microscopic grains preserved beneath wetlands and forest floors, researchers can estimate which species once dominated entire landscapes, how temperatures shifted, and even when droughts altered the balance of ecosystems. A quiet swamp in the present can therefore contain a hidden archive of vanished centuries. Long before written history, forests expanded and retreated with the rhythm of ice ages. Vast glaciers once covered enormous portions of the northern hemisphere, pressing slowly across continents with such weight that they reshaped mountains and redirected rivers. As the ice withdrew, forests followed behind like living tides. Pine, birch, spruce, and oak gradually reclaimed the land, sometimes over thousands of years. What feels permanent in nature is often only temporarily paused. Even the oldest forests are moving through time. This slow migration continues today, though now it is accelerated by rapidly changing climates. Some tree species are gradually shifting northward or uphill in search of temperatures they evolved to tolerate. Entire ecosystems are quietly rearranging themselves generation by generation. Yet because trees live so long, forests often carry multiple climates within them at once. Ancient individuals may remain rooted in conditions that no longer truly belong to their species, while younger saplings begin adapting to a different future. There is something deeply humbling about the pace of these transformations. Human civilizations often measure time in elections, economies, and lifetimes. Forests measure time in drought cycles, fungal succession, and the rise and collapse of entire watersheds. A sapling growing today may outlive everyone currently alive. Somewhere on Earth, there are trees that began their lives while humans still traveled primarily by horse. And still, forests continue their patient experiments with survival. Some of the strangest of those experiments appear almost unreal. In the cloud forests of Costa Rica, trees gather moisture directly from passing fog. Moss coats branches so thickly that limbs resemble submerged coral reefs more than wood. Orchids bloom high above the ground without touching soil at all, extracting nutrients from rainwater and drifting organic particles. Meanwhile, in the boreal forests stretching across Russia and Finland, winter transforms entire ecosystems into states of near suspension. Snow absorbs sound so effectively that forests become unnaturally quiet. Beneath the frozen surface, however, life continues. Certain insects produce natural antifreeze compounds within their bodies. Small mammals tunnel beneath snow layers where temperatures remain surprisingly stable compared to the exposed air above. A forest in winter is not asleep in the way humans often imagine. It is waiting carefully. Perhaps nowhere is the hidden intensity of forests more visible than at night. Daytime forests can feel familiar, even welcoming. Birds move through visible branches. Sunlight defines distance and direction, but after darkness settles beneath the canopy, perception changes almost immediately. Depth becomes uncertain. Sounds gain importance. The mind begins constructing worlds from fragments. For most of human history, forests at night represented both danger and mystery. Predators hunted there, travelers vanished there, stories emerged there. Folklore from nearly every culture contains woodland spirits, hidden paths, or strange encounters beneath trees after sunset. And psychologically, this makes sense. The human brain evolved to pay close attention in low-visibility environments. In darkness, imagination naturally expands into uncertainty. A bending branch becomes movement. Wind resembles whispers. The nervous system becomes alert to possibility itself. Yet over time, many people discover another feeling inside nighttime forests. Not fear exactly, something quieter. The realization that the forest does not notice human anxieties at all. Owls continue hunting whether a person is worried or calm. Ferns continue unfolding. Rain gathers on leaves. Streams continue their slow erosion through stone exactly as they have for centuries. The forest is immense enough to contain human emotion without reacting to it. For some people, this indifference feels unsettling. For others, it feels deeply peaceful. Modern life often surrounds the mind with constant signals demanding attention. Notifications, schedules, traffic, advertising, endless streams of information. Forests operate according to entirely different rhythms. Nothing within them is optimized for urgency. A mushroom may take days to emerge after rainfall. A fallen trunk may decompose over decades. Soil itself forms through processes so gradual they become almost impossible to perceive directly. And yet these slow systems sustain nearly all complex life on land. Forests regulate temperatures, stabilize rainfall, prevent erosion, filter water, store carbon, and support astonishing biodiversity. More than 80% of terrestrial animal, plant, and fungal species are believed to live within forest ecosystems. A single tropical tree can host thousands of different organisms, from ants and beetles to lichens, birds, and microscopic bacteria living invisibly across its bark. Sometimes an entire ecosystem exists within another ecosystem. One scientist studying rainforest canopies described them as continents above the forest floor. And in many ways, that description is accurate. Conditions high in the canopy differ dramatically from conditions below. Sunlight intensifies, wind patterns shift, humidity changes. Entire species spend their lives suspended far above ground, rarely descending at all. Even now, researchers continue discovering new organisms in forests every year. Tiny frogs hidden inside bromeliad plants. Bioluminescent fungi glowing faintly along rotting wood. Insects so specialized they depend entirely upon a single tree species for survival. The deeper science looks into forests, the less simple they appear. Complexity keeps unfolding inside complexity, and perhaps that endless layering contributes to the dreamlike feeling forests often produce in the human mind. There is no single center to a forest, no final room where its meaning is revealed. Every path opens into more branches. Every fallen log contains smaller worlds beneath it. Even silence in a forest is not truly silence, but overlapping textures of distant water, insects, wind movement, leaf friction, and subtle animal calls fading into space. The brain drifts differently there. Studies using brain imaging have suggested that natural environments may reduce activity associated with repetitive negative thought patterns. Attention becomes less strained. The mind enters softer forms of focus, sometimes described as effortless attention. Unlike urban settings filled with abrupt demands, forests engage the senses gently and continuously. Light through leaves, the scent of wet soil, the irregular geometry of branches, the distant pulse of a woodpecker somewhere unseen. Nothing insists, everything unfolds. Perhaps this is why memories formed in forests often feel unusually vivid years later. The mind encodes sensory detail more richly when attention slows enough to notice it. A cool current of air beneath cedar trees, the sound of rain arriving gradually through layers of canopy before reaching the ground. Orange light filtering sideways through trunks at sunset while dust and pollen drift through the air like suspended gold. Forests invite observation without requiring conclusion, and in that sense, they resemble dreams themselves. Both are environments shaped partly by perception. Both blur the boundary between external reality and internal interpretation. Both operate through association, atmosphere, fragments, and emotion, rather than direct explanation. Deep within old forests, surrounded by organisms older and slower than ourselves, human thoughts often begin changing pace to match the environment around them. The nervous system loosens its grip on urgency. Time stretches, and the world begins to feel larger again. There are moments in certain forests when the air itself seems visible. Early in the morning, before direct sunlight fully reaches the ground, cold mist can drift between trunks in slow horizontal layers. Tiny droplets suspend themselves above moss and fern beds, while spider webs collect beads of moisture so delicate they resemble strings of glass. In these hours, sound behaves differently. Bird calls travel farther, footsteps soften against damp earth. Even breathing becomes more noticeable. Scientists sometimes describe forests as giant biological machines, but standing inside one at dawn rarely feels mechanical. It feels closer to entering a living atmosphere with its own moods and circulatory systems. Part of that sensation comes from chemistry. Trees release enormous numbers of airborne compounds known as phytoncides. These molecules help plants defend themselves against insects, fungi, and disease. Pine forests, cedar groves, and eucalyptus woodlands all produce their own distinct mixtures, subtly altering the scent and composition of the air around them. Humans inhale these compounds constantly while moving through forests, often without realizing it. Some researchers believe these airborne chemicals may partially contribute to the calming psychological effects associated with wooded environments. But long before laboratories measured any of this, people already sensed forests possessed different kinds of air. Ancient cultures repeatedly associated forests with healing, transformation, and altered states of awareness. Sacred groves appeared across civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. In parts of Greece, oak forests were linked to prophecy. In regions of India, certain forests became places for meditation and withdrawal from ordinary social life. Among many indigenous cultures across North America, forests were understood not as empty wilderness, but as inhabited landscapes filled with relationships between animals, plants, weather, memory, and spirit. Even today, entering an old forest often changes human behavior almost immediately. Voices lower instinctively, movement slows, people begin looking upward more often. There is a psychological effect produced by vertical space in forests. Tall trunks pull attention toward the canopy, encouraging the eyes to travel beyond immediate surroundings. Cathedrals were later designed with similar upward dimensions, and historians have occasionally noted the resemblance between sacred architecture and ancient groves. Columns like tree trunks, filtered light like leaves, silence structured by height. Long before stone buildings reached upward, forests were already creating spaces that altered human perception, and some forests still feel almost impossibly ancient. In the temperate rainforests of New Zealand, giant kari trees once grew so massive that early European sailors believed their trunks resembled the pillars of enormous wooden halls. In parts of Tasmania, certain slow-growing alpine shrubs may survive for thousands of years by continuously regenerating themselves through connected root systems. Some clonal colonies of trees, where genetically identical trunks emerge from shared underground roots, may represent some of the oldest living organisms on Earth. A forest can therefore be both ancient and continuously young at the same time. Leaves fall, saplings emerge, fungi bloom and vanish, animals migrate through changing seasons. Yet beneath all this motion, deeper structures persist across centuries. One of the most fascinating examples exists underground. Forest soil is alive in ways difficult to fully imagine. A single teaspoon of healthy forest earth can contain billions of microorganisms: bacteria, fungal spores, nematodes, protozoa, microscopic arthropods, and networks of mycelium stretching through darkness like living lace. These organisms break down organic matter, recycle nutrients, stabilize soil structure, and form relationships with roots that allow entire ecosystems to function. Without decomposition, forests would suffocate beneath their own remains. Every fallen branch, dead insect, and decaying leaf must eventually return to the soil. Fungi perform much of this invisible labor. Certain species release enzymes capable of breaking apart lignin, one of the toughest structural compounds in wood. White rot fungi, for example, can slowly dissolve fallen trees into soft fibers over years or decades, returning trapped nutrients back into circulation. In a sense, forests survive through continuous transformation of death into future life. Nothing remains unused for long. Even fire, which humans often experience as catastrophe, can become part of a forest's renewal cycle. Some pine cones only open after exposure to extreme heat. Certain ecosystems evolved alongside periodic wildfire for thousands of years. Low-intensity burns clear underbrush, recycle nutrients into soil, and create openings where sunlight reaches the forest floor, allowing dormant seeds to germinate. After a fire passes through, landscapes that appear devastated sometimes begin recovering with surprising speed. Green shoots emerge from blackened ground, wildflowers bloom in nutrient-rich ash, insects arrive first, followed by birds and grazing animals. Forest succession begins again. Nature's resilience can appear almost unreal when viewed across long enough timescales, and still, forests remain fragile. A mature rainforest may require centuries to develop the layered complexity lost in a single season of destruction. Old-growth ecosystems contain relationships so intricate that many cannot simply be replanted once removed. Soil chemistry changes, moisture cycles shift, species disappear, even soundscapes transform. Researchers recording audio in degraded forests discovered something haunting. As biodiversity declines, forests often become acoustically emptier. Fewer insects call at dusk, birdsong becomes less varied. The layered texture of natural sound slowly thins. The silence of a damaged forest is different from the silence of a healthy one. Healthy forests are full of subtle conversation. Crickets pulsing beneath leaves, branches creaking in wind, frogs answering one another across wetlands, rain moving gradually through different canopy levels before finally reaching the earth below. These overlapping rhythms create what some acoustic ecologists call biophony, the combined sound produced by living organisms within an environment. Human nervous systems appear remarkably sensitive to these natural sound textures. Water, birdsong, rustling leaves, and low-frequency wind movement often reduce perceived stress faster than artificial noise environments. Perhaps because for most of human history, these sounds signaled something important: safety, water nearby, weather patterns behaving normally, ecosystems functioning as expected. Deep in the subconscious mind, forests may still represent conditions under which human beings originally learned to survive. And maybe this explains another strange phenomenon people often report after spending extended time in forests. Thoughts begin changing shape, not disappearing exactly, but slowing enough to unfold differently. Problems that felt sharp inside cities become less rigid beneath trees. Attention widens. The mind drifts outward into observation rather than circling endlessly inward. Hours pass differently in forests. Without clocks, traffic, or constant digital interruption, the brain starts orienting itself through older signals instead. Sun angle, temperature, bird activity, the gradual dimming of light beneath the canopy. Human perception recalibrates to natural rhythms astonishingly quickly. And as evening approaches, forests undergo another transformation entirely. Day insects retreat while nocturnal species emerge from bark, soil, hollow trunks, and hidden burrows. Moths navigate by moonlight. Bats begin tracing invisible aerial routes through open spaces between branches. Somewhere far away, an owl calls once into the darkness, and then the forest becomes quiet again, as though listening to itself breathe. Night inside a forest is never completely dark. Even beneath heavy canopy, there are always fragments of light. Moonlight filtering through moving leaves, pale reflections from streams, the faint silver outline of branches against the sky. Human eyes gradually adapt, discovering shapes that seemed invisible only minutes earlier. Depth returns slowly. Textures emerge from shadow, and with that adjustment comes an unusual awareness of space. During daylight, forests often appear visually crowded. Thousands of leaves and branches compete for attention at once, but at night, detail fades away, leaving only structure. Tall trunks become columns disappearing upward into darkness. Openings between trees resemble corridors leading deeper into the unknown. Distances feel larger than they truly are. Perhaps this is one reason forests have inspired mythology for so long. In darkness, the human imagination naturally begins completing what it cannot fully see. Across centuries, forests became settings for transformation stories. Characters entered forests and emerged changed. In fairy tales from Germany, wandering woods often represented uncertainty and psychological transition. In Scandinavian folklore, deep forests marked the edge between the familiar world and something older, stranger, and less controllable. Even today, modern storytelling continues using forests as places where ordinary rules loosen slightly. And beneath the fiction, there may be a deeper truth hidden there. Forests genuinely alter human perception. Studies have shown that people navigating wooded environments rely more heavily on spatial memory, sound awareness, and environmental cues than they do in structured urban spaces. The brain shifts modes, attention becomes more distributed across the senses. Small sounds gain meaning, smells become informative, peripheral vision becomes more active. The body remembers older survival systems. But unlike many modern environments engineered around urgency and stimulation, forests often engage those systems gently rather than aggressively. There are no flashing advertisements in a forest, no sudden alarms demanding immediate response. Even danger tends to unfold gradually through weather, terrain, or changing light. Nature rarely hurries, even when it is powerful. A storm approaching through dense woodland can take hours to fully arrive. First comes the subtle pressure change, then cooler air moving beneath leaves, distant thunder, branches shifting, the scent of rain rising from dry soil before the first drop has even fallen. Scientists call that scent petrichor. It emerges when rainfall disturbs oils produced by plants and compounds released by soil bacteria. Humans are surprisingly sensitive to it. Some researchers believe our species evolved to recognize the smell because rain was historically tied to survival, agriculture, and freshwater availability. So even the smell of approaching rain may reach into ancient parts of the human nervous system, and forests amplify that experience beautifully. Rainfall inside a forest unfolds in layers. High canopy leaves intercept the first drops. Water collects, gathers weight, and then releases downward in irregular rhythms. Different tree species create different sounds. Broad leaves produce heavier percussion. Pine needles soften impact into whispers. Moss absorbs almost everything. During heavy storms, forests can temporarily create entire weather worlds beneath their canopies. Air temperatures shift, mist rises from the ground, streams swell and darken. Tiny rivers form between roots before vanishing again hours later. And afterward comes one of the quietest transformations in nature. Steam lifting from wet earth at sunrise, spiderwebs jeweled with water, mushrooms emerging almost overnight from fallen logs. Fungi are among the strangest organisms forests contain. Neither fully plant nor animal, they form hidden kingdoms beneath the soil and bark. Some species glow faintly in darkness through bioluminescence, producing pale green light so subtle it may only become visible after human eyes fully adjust to the night. Early travelers occasionally described glowing forests with a mixture of fear and wonder, not realizing the light came from living fungi feeding quietly on decaying wood. Even today, bioluminescent forests can feel dreamlike beyond explanation. Yet scientifically, the phenomenon is still not completely understood. Researchers continue debating why certain fungi evolved the ability to glow at all. Some theories suggest the light attracts insects that help spread spores. Others propose it may simply result from metabolic chemical reactions without a larger evolutionary purpose. Nature does not always reveal clear answers. Sometimes forests simply present mysteries and continue growing around them. One of the deepest of those mysteries involves time itself. Trees experience time differently from humans. Their lives unfold through seasons rather than hours. A drought lasting several years may represent only a small chapter in the lifespan of an old cedar or oak. Damage becomes encoded inside growth rings, preserving records of fire, rainfall, volcanic eruptions, and climate shifts across centuries. Scientists studying tree rings, a field called dendrochronology, can reconstruct environmental histories with astonishing detail. A single ancient tree may contain evidence of forgotten droughts, insect outbreaks, and even cosmic events affecting chemistry. Forests therefore store memory physically within wood, and unlike human memory, those records do not rely on emotion or storytelling. They exist quietly in layered cellular patterns hidden beneath bark. There is something calming about that kind of memory, not selective, not dramatic, simply accumulated through survival. Perhaps this is why sitting near old trees can produce such unusual emotional reactions in people. Not because trees possess wisdom in a mystical sense, but because their presence stretches human perception beyond ordinary timescales. An old tree has already endured storms that frightened previous generations. Winters nobody alive remembers. Summers before modern roads or cities existed nearby. It continues standing through all of it. Wind after wind, season after season. Steady growth measured almost invisibly. And forests themselves are masters of patience. When openings appear in the canopy after a large tree falls, younger plants below begin responding almost immediately to increased sunlight. Some species may wait years in shadow for exactly such a moment. Seeds buried in soil can remain dormant astonishingly long before conditions finally become favorable for growth. A forest is full of delayed possibilities. Not every process happens immediately. Not every opportunity is visible on the surface. Beneath quiet landscapes, countless biological systems are waiting, adjusting, conserving energy, preparing for futures not yet arrived. In this way, forests often mirror the deeper rhythms of human life more honestly than modern culture does. Growth is rarely constant. Healing is rarely linear. Important changes frequently happen underground long before they become visible. And perhaps this explains why people throughout history repeatedly returned to forests during periods of uncertainty, grief, reflection, or transition. The environment itself encourages a slower relationship with thought. A person walking beneath trees for hours eventually begins noticing details that would normally disappear beneath mental noise. The geometry of bark, tiny movements in leaves before wind becomes audible, the changing density of sunlight across the trail, bird calls repeating from specific territories. Attention deepens naturally. The forest asks for nothing, yet gradually receives complete awareness anyway. And somewhere beyond the visible path, hidden in darkness between roots and stone, millions of quiet lives continue unfolding together exactly as they have for ages, beneath the endless breathing canopy of the trees. There are forests where the trees themselves seem to erase sound. In dense, snow-covered woodlands, fresh snowfall traps tiny pockets of air between ice crystals, absorbing vibrations before they can travel very far. Footsteps become muted, wind softens into low movement rather than noise. Even distant rivers seem quieter beneath winter conditions. For some people, this silence feels almost supernatural, but it is a physical phenomenon shaped by texture, moisture, and air. Forests constantly reshape sound in subtle ways. Thick bark absorbs echoes. Moss dampens vibration. Leaves scatter higher frequencies unpredictably. A forest is therefore not just a visual environment, but an acoustic architecture built from living material, and humans appear deeply sensitive to it. Researchers studying natural soundscapes discovered that certain combinations of environmental sounds consistently reduce mental fatigue. Flowing water, low wind through trees, distant bird song, and rhythmic insect activity create patterns the brain processes differently from artificial noise. Unlike traffic or electronic alerts, natural sounds tend to fluctuate gradually without demanding immediate reaction. The nervous system relaxes into listening rather than defending itself against interruption. Perhaps this is why people often sleep more deeply after spending time outdoors in forests. Light exposure resets circadian rhythms. Air temperatures fluctuate naturally. Attention disperses across wider sensory fields, instead of remaining locked onto screens or repetitive thought loops. The forest quietly reorganizes perception. Even breathing changes there. Inside densely wooded environments, humidity often rises while temperatures remain cooler beneath the canopy. Air moves differently around trunks and understory plants, carrying scents slowly rather than dispersing them immediately. Pine resin, damp soil, crushed leaves, and distant rain all linger together in layered atmospheric textures. At night, these scents intensify. As temperatures fall, moisture settles closer to the ground. The smell of earth becomes richer. Decaying wood releases sweet fungal notes into the air. Streams hidden beyond the trees announce themselves through cool mineral scent long before they become visible. Long before modern instruments existed, humans navigated forests partly through smell. Animals still do. A deer can detect predators from astonishing distances through shifting wind currents. Wolves interpret scent trails like moving maps. Even insects navigate forests chemically, following invisible pathways produced by flowers, bark, or decaying matter. To human beings, forests may appear primarily visual. To many other organisms, they are oceans of scent, and beneath all of it lies another hidden world entirely, the forest floor at night. When darkness settles, countless small lives emerge from concealment. Beetles move across bark searching for fungus. Salamanders leave damp hiding places beneath logs. Moths drift silently between branches like fragments of ash carried by invisible currents. In tropical forests, nighttime biodiversity can become overwhelming. Scientists conducting nocturnal surveys in rainforests sometimes discover entirely different ecosystems active after sunset than during daylight hours. Creatures hidden all day suddenly dominate the environment. Frogs begin calling from pools formed by rainwater trapped inside leaves. Predatory spiders construct webs across narrow gaps in vegetation. Tiny mammals move through the canopy using routes impossible to detect during the day. The forest transforms with darkness, not by becoming inactive, but by changing shifts. Some organisms sleep while others awaken, and overhead, above even the tallest trees, the atmosphere continues moving according to rhythms far older than forests themselves. Moonlight influences many woodland behaviors in subtle ways. Certain predators hunt more successfully during bright, lunar phases. Some coral fungi release spores in response to moisture and moon cycles. Insects alter movement patterns depending on nighttime illumination. Even plants appear responsive to lunar rhythms in ways scientists still debate and investigate. Nature rarely separates itself into simple categories. The more closely forests are studied, the more interconnected their systems appear. Fungal networks influence tree growth. Tree density alters rainfall patterns. Rainfall changes insect populations. Insects affect bird migration. Birds distribute seeds. Seeds reshape future forests. Everything touches something else. This interconnectedness becomes especially visible after disturbances. When a large tree falls in an old-growth forest, sunlight suddenly reaches the ground in new places. Temperatures shift locally. Moisture levels change. Insects arrive to feed on exposed wood. Birds follow insects. Fungi spread through damaged roots. Seedlings dormant for years begin accelerating upward into the opening. A single fallen tree can reorganize an entire section of forest life. Yet from a distance, the canopy may barely appear changed at all. Forests often conceal transformation inside apparent stability. Human lives can feel similar sometimes. Quiet internal changes accumulating invisibly until one day the structure of thought itself has shifted. Perhaps this is another reason forests feel psychologically restorative. They remind the mind that slow change is still real change. That not every important process announces itself dramatically. A forest does not rush to become complete. It is never truly finished anyway. Ecologists sometimes describe forests not as static places, but as ongoing conversations between species, climate, geology, water, and time. Every forest exists in transition between past and future states. Young forests differ from mature ones. Mature forests differ from ancient old-growth systems. Disturbance resets succession repeatedly across landscapes. Yet humans often enter forests, searching unconsciously for permanence. And strangely, forests provide it through motion rather than stillness. Rivers continue flowing, leaves continue falling, roots continue expanding through darkness. The continuity exists not because nothing changes, but because change itself never stops. This becomes deeply visible during autumn. In temperate forests, entire mountainsides shift color as trees prepare for winter dormancy. Chlorophyll fades from leaves, revealing pigments hidden beneath the green all along. Gold, amber, crimson, deep orange. What appears sudden is actually the final stage of long biological preparation. Trees are withdrawing nutrients from their leaves before releasing them. Even beauty in forests often emerges from conservation and adaptation. And then comes the falling. Millions of leaves descending gradually across trails, streams, stones, and quiet clearings. Layer upon layer, building soft insulation over the soil below. That blanket protects microorganisms through winter cold, while slowly transforming into future nutrients for spring growth. The forest recycles itself continuously. Nothing wasted, nothing isolated. Even dead wood remains essential. Fallen trunks store moisture during dry periods and provide shelter for insects, amphibians, fungi, and seedlings. Hollow trees become nesting chambers for birds and mammals. Cavities carved by woodpeckers may house generations of different species long after the original birds have left. In healthy forests, absence becomes habitat, and perhaps there is something quietly comforting about that idea. Modern culture often treats emptiness as failure, but forests reveal how space, decay, silence, and waiting all serve necessary functions within larger systems. The pause between storms matters. The dark soil beneath leaves matters. the fallen trunk matters. Nothing exists alone for very long. Some scientists studying forest ecosystems eventually describe them less as collections of individual organisms and more as relationships made visible. Trees shape fungi, fungi shape soil, soil shapes water retention, water shapes future growth. The forest is not merely made of living things, it is made of interactions, and somewhere deep inside ancient woodlands, beyond the reach of roads or artificial light, there are still places where these interactions continue almost exactly as they did thousands of years ago. Wind moving through untouched canopy, wolves crossing snowfields beneath stars, moss drinking quietly from cold rain. The same slow processes repeating through centuries, while human history rises and disappears around them like weather passing briefly through the trees. In the deepest forests, distance begins to feel different, not because the landscape necessarily becomes larger, but because visibility shortens. Hills disappear behind trunks. Sound bends unpredictably through vegetation. A place only a few hundred feet away may remain completely hidden behind layers of leaves, branches, and shadow. Human beings are accustomed to horizons. Cities create long, straight lines. Roads pull the eye forward. Open landscapes allow the brain to measure distance quickly. Forests interrupt that instinct. They reveal the world in fragments instead of panoramas. A bend in the trail, a sudden clearing, a shaft of light between branches. Everything arrives gradually, and psychologically, that gradual unfolding changes the pace of thought itself. The mind becomes less concerned with reaching distant points and more attentive to immediate surroundings. One step, one sound, one shifting pattern of light across bark. Perhaps this is why forests can make hours feel strangely suspended. Without obvious landmarks or constant reminders of time, attention settles into the present more completely. The brain stops dividing experience into strict schedules and begins following environmental rhythms instead. Sunrise through fog, midday warmth beneath the canopy, the cooling air before evening rain. For most of human history, these were the clocks that shaped daily life, and forests still operate by them. Even light behaves differently there. Inside old-growth forests, sunlight may take extraordinary journeys before reaching the ground. It reflects from leaf to leaf, filtered repeatedly through different layers of canopy, until it arrives softened and green-tinted below. In some dense rainforests, less than 2% of direct sunlight reaches the forest floor at all. Yet life adapts beautifully to these dim environments. Certain plants evolve enormous leaves capable of capturing tiny amounts of scattered light. Mosses thrive in perpetual shade. Ferns unfurl delicate structures specifically designed to maximize surface area for photosynthesis beneath dark canopies. The forest teaches survival through adjustment rather than force. And nowhere is this more visible than in the relationship between trees themselves. At first glance, forest competition appears obvious. Trees stretch upward towards sunlight, their branches weaving through limited space. But beneath that competition lies another reality. In healthy forests, trees often regulate one another in surprisingly balanced ways. Some species grow quickly and die young, opening space for slower-growing species that may survive centuries. Others enrich soil with nitrogen, allowing neighboring plants to flourish. The ecosystem stabilizes through diversity. Monocultures, forests dominated almost entirely by one species, often prove far more vulnerable to disease, insects, and environmental stress. But mixed forests distribute risk. Different root depths access different water reserves. Different leaf structures respond differently to storms or drought. Variety creates resilience. Nature rarely depends upon uniformity for long-term survival. And perhaps humans are drawn to forests partly because they embody a kind of order without rigidity. Nothing is identical, yet everything belongs. No two trees grow exactly alike. Wind twists trunks differently depending on exposure. Lightning scars bark in unpredictable patterns. Fungi bloom where moisture gathers. Streams carve unique paths through stone and sediment. The forest does not seek perfection. It seeks continuation. This becomes especially moving in damaged forests recovering from hardship. After volcanic eruptions, landslides, hurricanes, or fires, landscapes may initially appear lifeless. Ash covers the ground. Trees stand blackened or broken. Silence settles where birds once nested. Yet recovery often begins almost immediately. Lichens arrive first on bare surfaces, slowly breaking rock into soil. Grasses spread through exposed areas. Insects return. Small shrubs follow. Decades later, young forests emerge where destruction once seemed absolute. Ecologists call these patterns succession, life rebuilding itself through stages. Some of the most fascinating examples occurred after the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. Entire forests were flattened within minutes. Scientists expected recovery to take far longer than it ultimately did. Hidden seeds survived underground. Buried root systems produced new growth. Animals returned sooner than predicted. Nature's ability to regenerate can feel almost impossible until witnessed across enough time. And still, forests carry scars. A tree struck by lightning may survive for centuries afterward, its trunk permanently split or hollowed. Growth rings preserve evidence of drought years so severe they slowed expansion dramatically. Chemical traces locked inside wood reveal periods of wildfire smoke drifting through ancient skies. Forests remember physically, not emotionally, but structurally, and those memories accumulate layer upon layer beneath bark and soil, until entire landscapes become records of time. There is something deeply calming about that perspective. Human worries often feel overwhelming because they exist within such short timescales. Forests expand awareness outward. A storm that feels catastrophic during one season becomes only a narrow ring hidden inside the life of an old cedar. The tree continues growing around it, quietly, patiently. Perhaps this is why old forests often inspire emotional reactions difficult to fully explain. Standing among ancient trunks, people frequently report feelings of awe mixed with calmness. Psychologists studying awe describe it as an emotion triggered when the mind encounters something vast enough to challenge ordinary perception. Forests create that sensation naturally, not through spectacle alone, but through scale combined with subtlety. A giant tree does not move quickly. It does not announce itself. It simply exists with enormous quiet confidence, and the human nervous system responds. Heart rate slows, attention widens, internal chatter softens. The forest offers perspective without speaking. Even the air contributes to this effect. Dense forests contain unusually high concentrations of negative air ions near waterfalls, streams, and moist vegetation. Some studies suggest these particles may influence mood and alertness, though researchers continue exploring exactly how strong those effects may be. Whether through chemistry, sound, light, scent, or evolutionary memory, forests seem uniquely capable of altering mental states gently rather than forcefully. The experience unfolds almost invisibly. A person enters carrying stress. Hours later, something feels different, not solved necessarily, but quieter, and perhaps forests themselves understand quiet better than any other environment on Earth. Consider the lifespan of a tree. For decades it may simply grow, slowly thickening, extending roots, lifting branches toward light. Storms come and go around it, animals nest within it, insects tunnel through bark. Snow gathers along its limbs each winter before melting away again in spring. The tree witnesses without rushing. Meanwhile, beneath the soil, fungi connect root systems through networks more intricate than many cities. Nutrients move invisibly between organisms. Water rises through microscopic channels from root to leaf. Carbon from the atmosphere becomes wood through sunlight and time. A forest is performing miracles continuously, but at speeds humans rarely notice. Perhaps that is why spending time among trees can feel like waking from a kind of cultural hypnosis. Modern life trains attention towards speed, novelty, and urgency. Forests direct attention towards cycles instead: growth, decay, rest, renewal. The same patterns repeated endlessly beneath changing weather and stars. And at night, When wind moves softly through the canopy and the last traces of daylight disappear between the trunks, the forest begins to feel less like a place humans visit and more like an ancient living process that has been unfolding quietly since long before our species first learned to name the trees. In the final hours of night, a forest enters a state that feels almost indistinguishable from stillness. But it is not still. It is simply operating at a scale of movement too subtle for human perception. Leaves continue exchanging gases with the air. Roots continue adjusting their growth by fractions of millimeters. Fungi continue extending microscopic threads through soil. Even the cold itself is in motion, settling, shifting, redistributing through layers of terrain and canopy. A forest never truly pauses. It only changes rhythm. And that rhythm becomes especially noticeable when human presence disappears entirely. In untouched wilderness, far from roads or artificial light, nocturnal life begins shaping the soundscape in ways that are quiet yet continuous. A distant branch falls. A small animal moves through underbrush. Water finds a new path around stone. Wind threads itself between trunks with variable pressure. Each sound is isolated, yet part of a larger composition. Ecologists sometimes describe this as the forest's acoustic baseline, a kind of natural background presence that exists even in apparent silence. In ancient woodland regions of Scotland and Romania, where fragments of old-growth forests still remain, researchers have noted that nighttime environments carry a distinct layered quiet. It is not absence of sound, but reduction of sharpness. Nothing interrupts. Everything blends. The mind, when immersed in such environments, begins to lose its usual need to categorize sound immediately. Instead of identifying individual noises, perception drifts toward texture, soft, continuous, unresolved. This shift in attention is subtle, but profound, and it mirrors something happening throughout the entire ecosystem. Forests rarely operate through abrupt transitions. Even death is gradual. A tree weakens over years, sometimes decades, before finally collapsing. After falling, it slowly merges back into soil through fungi, bacteria, moisture, and time. There is no single moment where it becomes gone. Instead, it becomes redistributed. Matter changes form, but not presence. This continuity is one of the defining characteristics of forest systems. Energy moves through cycles without leaving the system entirely. Carbon enters through leaves, becomes wood, returns through decay, and re-enters soil and atmosphere. Water cycles through roots, air, clouds, rain, and rivers, repeatedly passing through living structures. Everything circulates, and because of that circulation, forests can appear both fragile and incredibly resilient at the same time. A single disturbance may alter them for centuries, yet the underlying processes remain intact, continuing their slow regeneration. Even in forests shaped heavily by human activity, remnants of this continuity persist. Abandoned agricultural land, for example, often begins returning to woodland through a process known as natural rewilding. Grasses appear first, then shrubs, then pioneer tree species that tolerate open sunlight and poor soil conditions. Over decades, shade increases, soil deepens, species diversity expands. Eventually, a forest begins to reassemble itself, not identical to what existed before, but structurally similar in its layered complexity. This return is not immediate. It unfolds across human generations. A person who plants a seed may never see the mature forest it becomes, and yet that forest will still carry the imprint of that beginning. Forests are accumulations of time, and time inside them is distributed rather than linear. This becomes especially clear when observing growth patterns in long-lived trees. Annual rings are not uniform. Some years produce wide rings, reflecting favorable conditions of rainfall and temperature. Other years produce narrow rings, indicating stress, drought, or competition. These variations form a detailed internal record of environmental history. A single tree can therefore contain a timeline written in wood, but unlike human archives, this record is not curated. It includes everything equally: abundance and scarcity, stability and disruption, survival and limitation. Nothing is edited out, and perhaps that honesty is part of why forests feel grounding to the human mind. They do not simplify reality. They reflect it in full complexity, but at a pace that allows comprehension. In the silence beneath ancient canopies, the mind begins to slow down enough to perceive patterns that are usually overlooked. The repetition of branches, the fractal structure of fern leaves, the branching similarity between rivers seen from above and veins inside leaves, the echo of geometry across scales of life. These patterns are not symbolic. They are structural. They emerge from shared physical constraints, shaping how matter organizes itself over time. Yet the human brain often interprets them as aesthetically calming, perhaps because recognition of pattern reduces cognitive effort, or perhaps because it connects perception to something deeper than immediate thought. In forests, even light participates in this slow rhythm of repetition and variation. As Earth rotates, sunlight filters through shifting angles, producing constantly changing shadows. A single patch of ground may transition from bright gold to muted green to deep blue-gray within a few hours. Nothing remains visually fixed, and yet the forest remains recognizable. This balance between change and continuity may be one of the most psychologically stabilizing features of natural environments. The mind is exposed to variation without instability, movement without chaos. Even weather reinforces this structure. Rain arrives in waves, not uniform streams. Wind increases gradually, peaks, then fades. Fog forms and dissolves in slow cycles. Storms build over hours, sometimes days, before passing and leaving quiet renewal behind them. Forests absorb these transitions without breaking. Trees bend, soil absorbs, roots stabilize, water redistributes. The system continues, and in that continuity, there is a form of resilience that does not depend on resistance, but on adaptation. In many ways, forests teach a kind of patience that is difficult to translate into human terms. Not passive waiting, but active endurance distributed across time. Growth that does not demand immediate results, recovery that does not erase history, stability that includes change rather than excluding it. Standing within such systems can subtly shift perception of one's own internal pace. Thoughts that once felt urgent begin to feel less absolute. Problems do not disappear, but they lose some of their pressure. The mind begins to recognize that not everything requires immediate resolution. Some processes are still unfolding. Some answers only appear with time. And so, beneath the quiet canopy, surrounded by organisms that may outlive entire civilizations, the sense of scale gently expands once more. The forest continues its breathing rhythm through night and shadow, through wind and stillness, through growth and decay, carrying forward its endless, patient unfolding. An ancient world still writing itself in silence beneath the stars. Before dawn arrives, the forest reaches a kind of threshold where night and day briefly coexist without fully replacing one another. The darkness does not disappear all at once. It thins gradually, like ink dispersing in water. Shapes begin to separate from shadow. The upper canopy shifts from black to deep indigo, then to muted gray-green. The first hint of birdsong emerges not as melody, but as isolated calls that seem unsure of their place in the air. This transition is one of the most sensitive periods in a forest's daily cycle. Many nocturnal animals are still active, completing final movements before retreat. At the same time, diurnal species begin to stir beneath cover. For a short interval, the forest belongs to both worlds simultaneously. It is neither fully awake nor fully asleep, and within that in-between state, perception becomes unusually delicate. Even the faintest sounds carry meaning. A leaf shifting, a distant wing beat, water dripping from saturated branches after nighttime condensation. These small signals form a quiet map of activity that humans rarely notice unless they pause long enough to listen without expectation. Forests reward that kind of attention, not with dramatic revelation, but with gradual clarity. As light strengthens, the internal structure of the forest becomes visible again. Layers that were flattened by darkness regain depth. The understory reveals its complexity, young saplings competing for filtered sunlight, ferns unfolding in spiral patterns, moss forming dense carpets over fallen logs. Each layer operates under different conditions of light, moisture, and temperature. The forest is not a single environment, but stacked environments interwoven together. Above, the canopy experiences wind and full sunlight. Below, the understory exists in filtered illumination. Closer to the ground, humidity stabilizes and temperature fluctuations soften. At the soil level, darkness and moisture dominate almost completely. These stacked worlds interact continuously, but remain distinct enough that entirely different species can occupy each layer without direct competition. A bird may spend its entire life in the canopy, without ever descending to the forest floor. A beetle may live entirely within decaying wood without ever seeing daylight. A fungus may span both realms without ever being visible at all. The forest is a vertical civilization of life, and as morning strengthens, movement increases across all levels at once. Birds begin territorial calls, not as random noise, but as structured communication defining space and presence. Squirrels navigate branches with rapid precision, tracing familiar routes between food sources. Insects emerge to warm themselves in early sunlight. Dew begins evaporating from leaves, releasing faint aromatic bursts into the air. Each moment is a transition, not abrupt, but continuous. Some of the most fascinating changes occur in the chemistry of the forest itself during this shift. As sunlight increases, photosynthesis accelerates rapidly. Carbon dioxide levels within the immediate forest air decrease slightly. Oxygen production rises, moisture levels shift as evaporation begins. Temperature gradients form between shaded and sunlit areas, creating small air currents that move through the trees in subtle patterns. The forest begins actively reshaping the atmosphere again. But unlike mechanical systems, there is no single control center. Every leaf contributes, every branch participates, every organism responds according to its own constraints, while still influencing the whole. It is coordination without centralization. One of the most remarkable aspects of forest ecology is how stability emerges from such distributed activity. No single tree maintains balance. No single fungus regulates nutrient flow. No single animal directs energy movement. Yet the system persists across centuries, adapting to disturbance and recovering from disruption. Scientists studying complex systems sometimes describe forests as examples of emergent organization, meaning that large-scale order arises from countless small interactions that follow relatively simple rules: growth toward light, response to moisture, exchange of nutrients, reaction to disturbance. From these basic interactions, entire ecosystems develop layered complexity, and yet, despite scientific understanding, forests continue to resist full simplification. There is always something slightly beyond measurement, a relationship between organisms that is difficult to quantify, a microclimate within a hollow tree that behaves differently from surrounding air, a fungal network whose full extent cannot be mapped completely, a behavioral pattern among animals that shifts subtly depending on season, soil, or unseen ecological cues. The more closely forests are studied, the more they expand rather than contract in perceived complexity. This is part of what gives them their enduring sense of mystery. Even in well-documented regions, new species continue to be discovered. Insects that live only under specific bark conditions, mosses that appear only after rare combinations of rainfall and temperature, fungi that form relationships with single tree species and nowhere else. Discovery in forests is never finished. It simply changes form. In earlier centuries, forests were often viewed as boundaries, edges of civilization where known order ended. Today, they are more often understood as reservoirs of biodiversity and climate regulation. But psychologically, they still carry remnants of that older perception. Spaces slightly outside human control, where natural systems operate according to their own logic. This sense of autonomy is part of their emotional effect. In a world increasingly shaped by human design, Forests remain among the few environments where complexity is not fully engineered. They grow themselves, they maintain themselves, they evolve without instruction, and perhaps that is why time spent within them can feel so distinctly different from time spent elsewhere. Inside forests, time is not segmented into productivity or output. It is experienced as continuation. One moment leading into the next without sharp division. Walking along a forest path, it is easy to lose awareness of where one segment of time ends and another begins. Distance becomes less important than texture. Direction becomes less important than observation. A fallen branch, a patch of sunlight, the shifting sound of wind through different tree species. Attention moves fluidly between details without needing to assemble them into a single narrative. And in that state, something subtle happens to perception itself. The mind begins to mirror the structure of the environment. Non-linear, layered, interconnected. Thoughts arrive not as conclusions, but as associations. Memories surface without clear triggers. Ideas form and dissolve without urgency. Awareness becomes less fixed, more open. Forests do not instruct this change. They simply surround it. And as morning fully arrives, the forest settles into its daytime rhythm once again. Not louder, not faster, but more illuminated. The same processes continue beneath the presence of light that were unfolding in darkness only hours earlier. Leaves continue exchanging gases. Roots continue growing in hidden soil. Fungi continue extending through unseen networks. Animals continue moving through established patterns of survival and interaction. Nothing essential has changed. Only visibility has shifted. And within that continuity, the forest remains what it has always been. A vast, living system of relationships unfolding quietly through time, carrying forward its ancient, patient intelligence beneath the rising sun. As the sun climbs higher, the forest does not become simpler. It only becomes more legible to human perception. What was once hidden in shadow now reveals layers of detail that were always present. Bark textures sharpen into intricate topographies of ridges and grooves. Individual leaves separate visually from the mass of canopy. Movement becomes easier to trace, yet no less complex in its underlying structure. Morning light does not create the forest. It only translates it, and in that translation, new patterns emerge in awareness. The same space that felt quiet at night now reveals itself as continuously active. Bees navigate between blossoms with precise routes shaped by memory and scent. Ant colonies expand their invisible highways beneath soil and leaf litter. Birds repeat territorial circuits that map the forest into overlapping acoustic zones. Each species occupies its own interpretation of the same environment. A single forest, experienced in thousands of ways simultaneously. This multiplicity is one of the most defining characteristics of forest ecosystems. There is no singular forest experience in an ecological sense. Instead, there are layered perceptions, each shaped by the sensory and biological constraints of different organisms. A bat constructs the forest through echolocation reflections. A deer constructs it through scent gradients and sound sensitivity. A fungus constructs it through chemical exchange and moisture pathways. And a human constructs it through vision, memory, and selective attention. None of these perspectives are complete, yet together, they describe a system far more intricate than any single viewpoint can capture. As sunlight strengthens, energy flow within the forest increases noticeably. Photosynthesis reaches its daily peak. Leaves adjust angles subtly to avoid overheating while still maximizing light absorption. Water begins moving upward through tree trunks in continuous columns driven by transpiration pull. Inside each tree, microscopic channels transport moisture from soil to canopy, in a process so consistent it resembles quiet hydraulics. But unlike engineered systems, there is no central pump, no mechanical control, just physics, biology, and time working together in a distributed network. This upward movement of water is one of the most extraordinary hidden processes in nature. A tall tree can move gallons of water from ground to canopy each day, without any muscular effort. The system depends entirely on evaporation from leaves, cohesion between water molecules, and the structural properties of xylem tissue. A silent column of water stretches from roots to sky, and it holds, even under significant gravitational pull. Forests, in this sense, are constantly performing large-scale physical operations that remain invisible without scientific interpretation. Yet they do not feel mechanical. They feel alive because every process is embedded within living structure. Branches are not pipes. Leaves are not panels. Roots are not cables. They are living tissues participating in both growth and function simultaneously. This blending of structure and activity is what makes forests so difficult to reduce into simple analogies. And perhaps that resistance to simplification is part of their psychological effect as well. The human mind often seeks clear categorization, but forests rarely offer it. Instead, they present overlapping systems that interact without strict boundaries. Soil becomes atmosphere, decay becomes growth. Individual organisms become part of shared networks. Even distinctions between self and environment blur at the ecological level. This does not mean forests are mystical in a supernatural sense. It means they are systems where separation is less defined than connection. As the day continues, temperature gradients begin shaping movement patterns across the landscape. Shaded areas remain cool, attracting certain species that avoid heat stress. Sunlit clearings become active zones for basking insects and seed germination. Wind patterns shift as air flows between open spaces and dense clusters of vegetation. The forest becomes a dynamic mosaic of microclimates. Each patch of ground may differ slightly in humidity, temperature, and light exposure. To a passing observer, it may appear uniform, but at ecological resolution, it is highly varied. This variation is one reason forests support such extreme biodiversity. Different species specialize in narrow ecological niches created by small environmental differences. A slight change in moisture can determine which moss grows on a log. A minor shift in sunlight can determine which seedlings survive beneath canopy gaps. Life in forests is shaped by subtle gradients rather than sharp divisions, and over long periods, these gradients produce evolutionary adaptation at remarkable scale. Some plants evolve to thrive only in deep shade. Others require direct sunlight to germinate. Some fungi exist only in association with specific tree species. Certain insects depend entirely on seasonal timing of leaf emergence or decay cycles. Every specialization adds another thread to the larger ecological fabric, and that fabric extends beyond visible boundaries. Forests influence surrounding landscapes through water cycles, wind patterns, and soil stability. They regulate river flow by absorbing rainfall and releasing it gradually. They prevent erosion by binding soil with root networks. They modify local climate by altering humidity and temperature dynamics. In many regions, forests function as environmental regulators for entire watersheds. Their presence shapes conditions far beyond their physical edges. And yet, from above, they can appear deceptively simple. Large green expanses covering land without revealing internal complexity. Only when entered do they unfold into layered structure. This difference between external appearance and internal reality is one of the most consistent themes in forest observation. It applies not only spatially, but temporally as well. A forest in a single moment may appear static, but across hours, days, seasons, and centuries, it is continuously transforming. Trees grow, fall, decompose, and regenerate. Species composition shifts, soil composition evolves, climate influences alter structure gradually over generations. A forest is never in one state. It is always in transition. And that transition rarely has a clear endpoint. Even so-called mature forests are not final forms. They are temporary equilibria shaped by current conditions. A storm, a fire, a disease outbreak, or a shift in climate can redirect their trajectory entirely. Stability in forests is not absence of change, it is continuity through change. As midday light intensifies, the forest reaches another subtle peak of activity. Photosynthesis is at maximum capacity. Animal movement increases. Heat encourages airflow between canopy layers. Insects become more active in warm patches of sunlight. Shadows shorten and sharpen beneath trees. Yet despite this activity, there is still a sense of coherence. Nothing feels chaotic, because everything is responding to shared environmental conditions. The forest does not synchronize through instruction. It synchronizes through exposure. And as the day continues forward, the same processes that defined morning will slowly begin their reversal. Light will soften, temperature will decline, nocturnal systems will prepare again beneath the surface of perception. The cycle continues, not repeating exactly, but echoing forward in slightly different form each day. And beneath that endless rhythm of transformation, the forest remains what it has always been. A living continuity of time, matter, and relationship unfolding quietly between earth and sky, without beginning, without conclusion, and without needing to be anything other than what it already is. As afternoon begins to soften into late day, the forest starts revealing a quieter kind of transition, one that is not marked by sudden change, but by gradual withdrawal of intensity. Light becomes warmer, less vertical. Shadows lengthen slowly across the forest floor, stretching between roots and fallen branches like dark rivers flowing in the opposite direction of the morning sun. The atmosphere feels heavier, not in weight, but in presence. Everything appears slightly more grounded, as if the forest is settling back into itself after the brightness of midday. Yet beneath this visible shift, the forest remains fully active. Leaves continue their silent chemical work. Trees maintain water transport from roots to canopy. Insects adjust their movement patterns in response to temperature and light changes. Birds begin to shift their activity windows, some preparing for final foraging cycles before dusk. What changes is not activity, but emphasis. The forest is always doing everything, but different processes become more noticeable depending on the light. As afternoon deepens, the sensory balance begins to shift again. The sharp clarity of midday vision softens. Colors lose some of their intensity and become more muted, more blended. Greens deepen into darker tones. The contrast between light and shadow increases. This is often when human perception begins to quiet naturally. There is something about late-day forests that encourages less interpretation and more observation. The mind stops trying to categorize every detail and begins to absorb atmosphere instead. And in that shift, subtle phenomena become more noticeable. The slight movement of air between trunks, the irregular rhythm of distant birds calling across territory boundaries, the way certain leaves catch sunlight, while others remain completely still. The slow drift of pollen or dust particles suspended in slanted light. These details are always present, but rarely prioritized by attention. Forests do not change what they offer, they change what is perceived. In some regions, especially in temperate forests of Norway and South Korea, late afternoon light can create dramatic contrasts between sunlit clearings and shaded understory. This contrast enhances the sense of depth within the forest, making distance feel more layered, almost stratified. A single trail may pass through multiple micro-worlds within a few minutes. Bright, open patches filled with warmth. Cool, shaded corridors where air feels still and dense. Sloped areas where wind moves differently depending on elevation and tree density. The forest becomes a sequence of shifting environments, rather than a single continuous space. And yet, despite this variation, it remains unified. Because all transitions are gradual, nothing breaks the continuity. Even as evening approaches further, the forest does not switch states, it drifts. Temperature begins to fall slightly. Animal activity becomes more purposeful, less exploratory. Day-active species complete final cycles of movement, while nocturnal species begin subtle preparation beneath cover. Burrows, hollow logs, dense thickets, and root cavities become increasingly active zones of hidden life. In this overlap, twilight forests hold a unique ecological tension. Two biological schedules intersect without conflict, one fading outward, one rising inward. This is one of the most dynamic periods in forest ecology. Even though it appears visually calm, sound changes again during this time. Birdsong reduces in frequency but becomes more spatially distinct. Insects begin their evening chorus, often forming rhythmic patterns that gradually build as temperature drops. Wind sound becomes more noticeable as daytime insect noise diminishes. The forest does not become quieter, it becomes differently composed, and humans often perceive this shift as a kind of emotional atmosphere change. Not necessarily sadness or joy, but something more neutral and reflective. A sense of transition itself. Psychologists studying environmental perception sometimes describe these states as soft attention, a mode of awareness where focus is less fixed and more receptive. Forests naturally encourage this condition because they provide continuous but non-demanding sensory input. Nothing in a forest requires immediate reaction. Everything unfolds at its own pace. As sunlight lowers further, long shadows begin to merge across the forest floor. Individual shapes become less distinct. Trees that appeared separate during midday begin to visually merge into layered silhouettes. The forest gradually returns to abstraction, and in that abstraction, imagination becomes more active again, not in a disruptive way, but in a gentle interpretive drift. The mind begins filling in gaps left by diminishing light, reconstructing space through memory and expectation. This is part of why twilight forests often feel slightly dreamlike. Perception and interpretation begin blending again, yet unlike nighttime uncertainty, twilight carries familiarity. There is still enough light to anchor reality, but not enough to define it completely. It exists between clarity and obscurity, and forests seem especially suited to this in-between state. As evening progresses further, moisture in the air often increases slightly. Cooler temperatures allow humidity to settle closer to the ground. The scent of soil strengthens again. Plant oils and decomposing organic matter become more noticeable in the air. The forest begins to smell deeper, less like surface vegetation, more like underlying earth. And with that shift, another layer of perception opens, the sense of grounding. Human awareness becomes more physically anchored in environment, the feeling of standing on soil rather than simply observing it, the awareness of temperature against skin, the subtle awareness of breathing in cooler air. Forests often amplify bodily awareness without overwhelming it. They do not isolate the mind from the body. They reintegrate them. And as daylight continues to fade, the forest begins its final visible transformation of the day. Colors drain slowly from the landscape. Greens darken. Browns deepen. The sky above the canopy shifts from gold to pale blue to gray. The outlines of trees become more dominant than their textures. Structure replaces detail, silhouette replaces surface, and in that transformation, the forest begins to prepare for night once again. Not as a different place, but as a different mode of perception. The same roots remain beneath soil. The same canopy remains above. The same systems continue functioning without interruption. Only visibility will change, and soon, as light disappears completely, the forest will return once again to its quieter state of hidden motion, where life continues without spectacle, where time moves without measurement, and where the ancient rhythm of growth, decay, and renewal carries on beneath darkness, unchanged and uninterrupted, as it always has been. The final light of evening lingers longest at the highest points of the forest. The upper canopy may still hold traces of gold, while the ground below has already entered shadow. Tall branches glow briefly against the darkening sky before fading one by one into silhouette. It is a slow disappearance, almost imperceptible moment to moment, yet complete by the time the first stars begin to appear through openings between the leaves. And during this descent into night, the forest undergoes one of its most remarkable transformations. Not because the environment itself changes dramatically, but because human perception does. Daylight favors detail. Darkness favors awareness. In low light, the eyes lose color sensitivity first. Shapes become more important than textures. Movement becomes more important than form. Sound and spatial intuition begin compensating for reduced visibility. The brain reallocates attention across the senses without conscious instruction. Inside a forest, this transition feels especially profound because the environment is already layered and partially concealed. Night simply deepens qualities that were present all along. Distance becomes uncertain again. A tree only 20 feet away may appear much farther. Open spaces shrink visually while shadows expand. The forest floor, once textured with leaves and roots, becomes smoother in perception, almost ocean-like in its darkness. And still, Life continues everywhere. Many nocturnal species are only now becoming fully active. Small mammals emerge cautiously from hidden shelters. Predatory insects begin hunting beneath bark and foliage. Moths navigate using lunar light and polarized patterns in the night sky. Bats move silently through invisible corridors between branches, adjusting flight paths in fractions of a second through echolocation. To them, the forest has not dimmed. It has simply changed audience. This shift reminds us that darkness is not absence, but alteration. Human beings often experience night as limitation because our vision weakens within it. Yet countless organisms are specifically adapted for these conditions. Some animals possess eyes capable of amplifying minimal light, others rely almost entirely on scent, vibration, or sound. The forest contains multiple realities layered within the same physical space, each revealed by different forms of perception. And perhaps this is one reason forests continue to feel mysterious no matter how much science explains them. Knowledge expands understanding, but it does not eliminate depth. A forest is too distributed, too interconnected, too alive to ever feel entirely solved. Even now, scientists continue uncovering relationships between organisms that were invisible for centuries. Trees responding chemically to insect saliva, fungi influencing root architecture, soil microbes affecting plant communication and resilience. The deeper observation goes, the more the forest reveals itself not as a collection of separate entities, but as a living field of interaction. And interaction leaves traces. At night, some of those traces become unexpectedly visible. In certain humid forests, bioluminescent fungi emit faint green-blue light from decaying wood. Tiny insects flash intermittent signals between branches. In tropical regions, entire ecosystems may flicker softly with living light during warm evenings. These displays are subtle compared to artificial illumination, but perhaps because of that, they feel more intimate. The forest never overwhelms the senses with brightness. It invites slower perception instead. A person walking carefully through woodland at night begins noticing increasingly delicate forms of information. The slight change in sound when stepping from dry leaves onto moss, the temperature drop near water, the way wind behaves differently in dense stands of pine compared to open deciduous groves. Awareness becomes environmental rather than analytical. And over time, something unusual often happens. Fear diminishes, not because darkness becomes harmless, but because familiarity replaces abstraction. The mind stops imagining the forest as empty, unknown space and starts recognizing it as structured environment. A branch creaking in wind is no longer interpreted as mystery. It becomes part of the larger rhythm. This adaptation reflects something ancient within human cognition. For most of our evolutionary history, darkness was not optional. Humans learned to navigate uncertainty through attentiveness rather than constant illumination. Firelight extended visibility only slightly beyond the immediate circle. Beyond it, forests remained vast and largely unseen, and still, people lived beside them for thousands upon thousands of years. Stories were told there, shelter was built there, paths were remembered there. The forest was never merely scenery, it was context for human existence itself. Even modern language carries echoes of this relationship. Words like rooted, branching, grounded, and growth all borrow from forest structures to describe human experience. We instinctively use botanical metaphors to explain memory, identity, family, and time, perhaps because trees mirror something fundamental about continuity. A tree grows outward while remaining connected inward. Its oldest structures remain buried beneath newer layers. Damage becomes incorporated rather than erased. Seasons alter its appearance repeatedly without changing its underlying identity. Human lives often unfold similarly, and forests, by existing at slower scales of time, make those patterns easier to perceive. Late at night, when the forest settles into its deepest darkness, another phenomenon emerges: the sensation of expanded space. Without clear visual boundaries, the mind begins interpreting the environment less through sight and more through atmosphere. The forest no longer feels composed of individual objects, it feels continuous. Wind moving through canopy becomes less a sound from a location and more a surrounding presence. Distant water merges with air movement. The edges between separate sensory events soften. This continuity can produce a surprisingly calming effect. Modern environments constantly divide attention into fragments: screens, alerts, signals, schedules. Forests tend to reverse that fragmentation. Sensory experience becomes unified again, flowing rather than segmented. Even silence feels connected there. And somewhere within that stillness, the oldest processes continue without interruption. Roots absorb water from deep soil. Fungi exchange nutrients beneath fallen leaves. Trees release moisture into cooling air. Insects tunnel through bark. Owls move through darkness with nearly silent wings. None of it pauses for observation. The forest exists independently of being witnessed. There is something profoundly reassuring about that. A reminder that life continues beyond human attention. That enormous systems of growth and adaptation unfold constantly without requiring recognition. Forests do not perform for an audience. They simply persist, season after season, century after century. And eventually, as the night deepens fully and the sky above the canopy fills with distant stars, the forest reaches its quietest visible state once again. Not empty, not asleep, but suspended in its endless cycle of hidden motion and patient continuity. An ancient breathing world of roots, shadow, moisture, and living memory stretching silently across the earth beneath the dark and turning sky. Far above the forest, beyond the canopy and clouds, the night sky continues its own slow movement across the darkness. Stars appear fixed at first glance, yet the earth beneath them is turning continuously. Forests, mountains, rivers, and oceans are all rotating silently through space together. Every tree standing beneath the night sky is moving thousands of miles per hour with the planet, even while appearing completely still. There is something quietly astonishing about that contrast. Stillness inside motion, motion inside stillness. And forests embody this paradox beautifully. A forest can seem timeless, unmoving, almost permanent. Yet every part of it is in transition. Trees are growing, soil is forming. Water is evaporating from leaves into the atmosphere. Seeds are dispersing. Organisms are being born, feeding, decaying, and returning nutrients back into the earth. Nothing stands still for long, yet the whole remains recognizable across generations. Perhaps this is why ancient forests can produce such a strong emotional response in people. They reveal continuity without denying change. They demonstrate that transformation does not always require noise or spectacle. Sometimes the deepest changes happen gradually enough to feel invisible while they are occurring. A seed becoming a forest, a mountain slowly weathering into soil, a fallen tree transforming into habitat over decades. These processes move beneath ordinary human perception. But forests make them visible through patience, and patience is one of the rarest experiences in modern life. Human attention is increasingly pulled toward immediacy, instant communication, immediate results, constant updates. Forests operate according to entirely different principles. Nothing meaningful there happens instantly. Growth requires seasons, soil requires centuries. Ecological balance develops through relationships formed slowly over time. The forest is not optimized for speed. It is optimized for endurance. Even its architecture reflects this. Trees invest enormous energy into structures that may not fully mature for decades. Root systems spread gradually through darkness, stabilizing both the tree and the surrounding soil. Bark thickens layer by layer as protection against weather, insects, and fire. Strength emerges through accumulation, and perhaps that is why forests feel emotionally stabilizing to human beings. They exist outside many of the artificial pressures that dominate modern thought. They remind the mind of rhythms that cannot be rushed. Sunrise cannot be hurried. Winter cannot be skipped. A sapling cannot become ancient overnight. Everything unfolds through sequence. This reality becomes especially visible in the oldest forests on Earth. Some bristlecone pines in the mountains of California have survived for thousands of years in harsh environments of wind, cold, and thin soil. Their trunks twist into shapes that appear almost sculptural, carved by centuries of environmental stress. Portions of the trees may die while other sections continue living, allowing the organism to survive in fragmented yet persistent form. These trees do not embody perfection. They embody adaptation. Their survival is written directly into their shape, and forests everywhere contain similar records of endurance. Trees leaning permanently away from prevailing winds, roots exposed by erosion yet still holding firm, burn scars sealed over by decades of new growth. The landscape remembers every challenge physically, but it continues. There is a quiet dignity in that kind of persistence, not resistance through force, but through flexibility, through the ability to absorb disturbance without losing continuity entirely. In many ways, forests are masters of resilience because they are decentralized. No single organism controls the whole system. If one tree falls, others continue growing. If one species declines, ecological relationships adjust gradually around the change. Life redistributes itself. This distributed resilience is one reason forests have survived enormous planetary shifts across geological history. They endured ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and dramatic climate fluctuations long before humans appeared. Entire forest types vanished, while others emerged in new forms adapted to changing conditions. The forests of today are descendants of countless previous worlds, and traces of those ancient worlds still remain hidden inside them. Ferns, for example, belong to lineages far older than flowering plants. Long before modern forests existed, vast fern-like ecosystems covered portions of Earth during the Carboniferous period over 300 million years ago. Some of the coal-powering early industrial civilizations was formed from compressed remains of those prehistoric forests. Ancient sunlight stored inside buried trees. Even now, forests continue shaping the future atmosphere of the planet, just as their distant ancestors once did. The relationship between forests and Earth's climate is profoundly intertwined. Trees absorb carbon during growth and store it within wood, roots, and soil. Forests influence cloud formation, rainfall distribution, and regional temperatures. In some regions, the cooling effect of forests can significantly alter local climate patterns. A forest is not separate from the atmosphere. It is part of the atmosphere, and this interconnectedness extends beyond biology into psychology as well. Human beings are not observers standing outside nature. Our nervous systems developed within these environments. The sounds that calm us, the patterns that attract our attention, even our sensitivity to natural light cycles, all were shaped over immense stretches of evolutionary time. Perhaps this explains why forests often feel strangely familiar even to people who rarely spend time within them. Something ancient recognizes the environment before conscious thought fully does. The scent of rain-soaked soil, the movement of leaves in wind, the sound of distant running water. These experiences bypass intellectual analysis and reach directly into older layers of perception. And within forests, those layers awaken quietly. As midnight deepens, temperatures continue falling beneath the canopy. Moisture gathers along leaves and moss in tiny droplets reflecting faint starlight. The air becomes cooler, denser, slower moving. Animal activity shifts again as some nocturnal species retreat while others continue hunting through the darkest hours before dawn. The forest moves through phases of activity like tides, never static, never fully asleep, and always interconnected. A single owl catching prey influences rodent populations. Rodent behavior influences seed dispersal. Seed distribution shapes future plant growth. Plant growth alters habitat conditions for insects and birds. Every action enters larger cycles extending far beyond immediate visibility. This is one of the deepest lessons forests quietly offer. Nothing exists in isolation for long. Even solitude within a forest is surrounded by relationship. Trees connected through roots and fungi, streams connected to rainfall and mountains, soil connected to fallen leaves, and microscopic life. The forest is not made of separate parts assembled together. It is made of continuous exchange, and perhaps human beings feel calmer there because forests reveal a version of existence where participation matters more than control. No organism dominates completely. Survival depends upon responsiveness, adaptation, balance, and interdependence. The canopy bends with storms instead of resisting them rigidly. Roots spread where water can be found. Seeds travel where conditions allow. The system survives through flexibility, and somewhere beneath the stars, in forests stretching across continents and mountains and valleys, these ancient patterns continue exactly as they have for ages. Quietly breathing, quietly growing, quietly carrying the memory of Earth forward through darkness and light alike, toward the deepest part of night, when even the wind begins to calm. Forests can feel suspended outside ordinary time. The air cools to its lowest temperatures before dawn. Moisture settles across bark and leaves in almost invisible layers. Streams continue their steady movement through darkness, unchanged by the absence of light. High above the canopy, constellations drift slowly westward as the earth continues turning beneath them, and below, in the quiet soil, roots continue growing. This hidden growth is among the most remarkable aspects of forests. Human beings naturally notice what rises upward: trunks, branches, leaves catching sunlight, but much of a tree's life unfolds underground. Root systems extend through spaces between stones, around buried wood, through layers of mineral soil and decomposing organic matter. Some roots search deeply for stable water reserves. Others remain close to the surface, absorbing nutrients released from fallen leaves and decaying organisms. Together, they form living structures that can spread astonishing distances beneath the forest floor. In certain species, root systems even graft together naturally when they meet underground, allowing trees to share resources directly. Forests are often less individualistic than they appear from above. Boundaries between organisms become surprisingly fluid beneath the surface. This hidden interconnectedness may partly explain why forests seem to possess such strong internal stability. They are not collections of isolated trees competing endlessly for survival. They are layered communities linked through exchange, and exchange creates resilience. During droughts, water availability shifts across different parts of a forest. Trees with deeper access to moisture may continue surviving while others struggle. Fungal networks redistribute nutrients where possible. Growth slows collectively. The ecosystem adjusts rather than collapsing immediately. This adaptation is not conscious planning. It is emergent cooperation shaped by millions of years of evolution. Nature discovering balance through continuity. And continuity is perhaps the forest's greatest characteristic. Even after destruction, forests tend toward return. After avalanches clear mountainsides, pioneer plants begin stabilizing exposed soil. After floods recede, seeds germinate in nutrient-rich sediment. After fire passes through, dormant life beneath the surface often reawakens with surprising speed. The forest remembers how to begin again. There is something deeply reassuring about that reality. Not because forests are invincible, they are not, but because they reveal how life persists through cycles rather than permanence. Loss and renewal are not opposites there. They are connected phases of the same unfolding process. A fallen tree feeds future seedlings. Ash enriches soil. Decay creates habitat. Even endings become transitions. Human cultures throughout history repeatedly recognized this pattern intuitively. Forests became symbols not only of mystery, but of transformation. Myths often placed moments of change within wooded landscapes because forests naturally embody processes of transition. Entering a forest meant crossing into a space where ordinary structures loosened and deeper rhythms became visible. And perhaps this still happens psychologically today. Modern people entering old forests often describe an unusual shift in mental pace. Attention broadens, internal dialogue softens, time feels less fragmented, thoughts become less linear, more associative. Part of this may stem from reduced sensory overload, but another part may come from the environment itself. Forests present complexity without forcing constant decision-making. The brain can observe endlessly without needing immediate action. This creates a rare form of mental rest. Not emptiness, not distraction, but sustained, gentle engagement. The forest gives the mind enough detail to remain curious, yet not so much urgency that it becomes exhausted. And during the deepest hours of night, that effect intensifies. Darkness simplifies the visual world. Details disappear, leaving only essential forms: trunk, branch, horizon, movement. Without constant visual interpretation, awareness often becomes more diffuse and inwardly quiet. The forest stops feeling like scenery. It begins feeling atmospheric, almost oceanic, a surrounding presence rather than a collection of objects. Perhaps this is why people so often compare forests to dreams. Both dissolve rigid boundaries between separate things. Both operate through mood, association, texture, and gradual transition rather than explicit explanation. In dreams, places blend into one another without sharp edges. Forests can create similar sensations, especially at night, when perception softens and the environment becomes partially concealed. And yet forests are entirely real. Every root, every insect, every fungal thread exists physically within the larger system. The dreamlike quality comes not from fantasy, but from complexity exceeding ordinary conscious processing. The human mind simplifies reality constantly in order to function efficiently. Forests resist that simplification. There is always more occurring than can be fully tracked at once. A bird calling in the distance, water moving beneath stones, insects active inside bark, leaves exchanging gases with the night air. The forest exceeds awareness continuously, and strangely, that excess often feels calming rather than stressful, perhaps because it reminds the mind that not everything must be understood completely to be experienced meaningfully. As the night progresses toward dawn once more, subtle changes begin unfolding again beneath the canopy. Temperatures stabilize. Some nocturnal species reduce activity while early rising birds shift quietly within their sleeping places. Air currents alter direction slightly as atmospheric pressure changes with approaching daylight. The forest prepares for morning long before sunrise becomes visible, and somewhere high above the eastern horizon, light has already begun its return, not visible yet beneath the trees, but coming. The earth turns patiently toward it. This cycle has repeated over forests for hundreds of millions of years. Long before humans existed, forests experienced dawn and darkness in endless succession. Ancient fern forests beneath prehistoric skies, conifer forests during the age of dinosaurs, vast temperate woodlands spreading after glaciers retreated. Different trees, different animals, different climates, yet the rhythm remained: light, growth, darkness, renewal. Perhaps this continuity is what forests communicate most powerfully to human beings. Not permanence, but participation in something ongoing and vastly larger than individual experience. A forest does not exist in a single moment. It exists across time. Every old tree contains younger growth within it. Every patch of soil contains remnants of previous seasons. Every living organism participates in cycles extending backward and forward beyond what any one creature can witness entirely. And so, beneath the fading stars and cooling night air, the forest continues its endless work in silence. Roots searching through darkness, water rising invisibly through trunks, moss gathering moisture from the air, fungi breaking fallen wood back into earth. No urgency, no spectacle, only the patient continuity of life, reshaping itself moment by moment beneath the canopy. As dawn slowly approaches once again through the trees, long before the first light reaches the forest floor, the canopy begins to sense the coming morning. Leaves respond subtly to changing wavelengths in the atmosphere even before sunrise becomes visible to human eyes. Some flowers begin opening gradually in anticipation of pollinators. Birds shift position in their nests. Insects hidden beneath bark or within the soil alter their activity according to internal biological clocks, synchronized with the planet's rotation. The forest does not wait for dawn, it prepares for it, and this preparation unfolds quietly across countless organisms at once, each responding to signals almost too subtle for human perception. Tiny changes in temperature, minute shifts in humidity, the faintest increase in atmospheric brightness. Together, these changes create a gradual awakening that feels less like a beginning and more like a continuation. Because in forests, nothing truly starts from nothing. Every morning emerges from the processes of the previous night. Moisture gathered in darkness now coats leaves and moss in silver droplets. Cool air settling through valleys during the night begins moving upward again as temperatures slowly rise. Nocturnal creatures retreat, while leaving behind traces of their passage: disturbed leaves, faint tracks in damp soil, broken strands of spider silk catching the first hints of light. The forest carries memory forward continuously, and perhaps nowhere is this continuity more visible than in water. Streams flowing through forests are rarely still. Even during the quietest hours, water continues shaping the land molecule by molecule. It dissolves minerals from stone, carries nutrients through soil, supports insects, amphibians, fish, fungi, and entire microbial communities hidden beneath the surface. A forest's stream is not merely passing through the environment, it is part of the forest's circulatory system. The relationship between trees and water is profoundly intimate. Forests slow rainfall, absorb it through roots and soil, and release it gradually back into rivers and atmosphere. Without forests, water often moves too quickly across landscapes, causing erosion, floods, and unstable seasonal cycles. Healthy forests create stability by holding and redistributing moisture over time. Even the air within forests becomes part of this exchange. Through transpiration, trees release water vapor into the atmosphere, influencing cloud formation and regional rainfall patterns. Some scientists describe large forests as biotic pumps, systems capable of drawing moist air inland through the combined effect of billions of leaves releasing water into the sky. In this sense, forests are not simply growing beneath weather. They are helping shape weather itself, and yet they accomplish all of this without intention in the human sense. No central intelligence directs the process. The system emerges through countless small interactions repeated continuously across time. This may be one reason forests feel both intelligent and impersonal at once. They demonstrate extraordinary coordination without requiring conscious control. Roots respond to moisture gradients. Leaves respond to sunlight. Fungi respond to chemical signals. Animals respond to shifting conditions. Together, these responses create ecosystems of remarkable complexity, and complexity, when balanced, often feels calming to the human mind, not because it is fully understandable, but because it reveals order without rigidity. Forests are structured yet flexible, diverse yet coherent, dynamic yet stable across long timescales. Human beings often seek this balance unconsciously. Modern environments tend toward extremes: overstimulation or emptiness, noise or isolation, speed or exhaustion. Forests occupy a middle state, rich with information, yet never demanding too much attention at once. The nervous system softens there, and as dawn finally begins touching the highest branches, another daily transformation slowly unfolds across the landscape. The first direct light entering a forest often appears fragmented rather than continuous. Thin beams slip between trunks and branches, illuminating drifting particles of moisture and dust suspended in the air. Patches of ground brighten, while nearby areas remain entirely shadowed. The forest wakes unevenly. Some places receive sunlight immediately. Others may remain dim for hours beneath dense canopy. This unevenness creates extraordinary diversity in habitat conditions. Tiny differences in exposure influence temperature, moisture retention, and plant growth patterns. A single fallen log may support multiple ecosystems across its surface depending on how much light reaches different sections. Forests are built from gradients rather than absolutes. Nothing is entirely bright or dark, entirely dry or wet, entirely alive or dead. Transitions define everything. Even decomposition is gradual. A fallen branch does not suddenly become soil. It passes through stages inhabited by different organisms over time. Beetles tunnel through bark, fungi soften wood fibers, moss spreads across damp surfaces. Microorganisms break complex compounds into nutrients usable by future growth. Death becomes transformation rather than disappearance, and this transformation is not hidden away from the rest of the ecosystem. It remains fully integrated into daily life. Birds nest in hollow trunks. Seedlings grow from decaying logs. Insects feed on fungi that feed on fallen wood. The forest wastes almost nothing. Energy changes form and continues moving. Perhaps this is one reason forests can evoke such deep reflection about human existence itself. They reveal systems where endings and beginnings are inseparable, where individuality exists within larger cycles rather than outside them. An old tree falling creates space for sunlight. Sunlight supports new growth. New growth becomes future canopy. The cycle carries itself forward endlessly. And somewhere within that continuity, human beings often experience a rare sense of perspective. Personal concerns remain real, but they no longer feel isolated from the wider processes of life. The forest quietly demonstrates that uncertainty, change, decay, recovery, and growth are not interruptions to existence. They are existence. As morning strengthens fully, bird activity increases dramatically across the canopy. Calls overlap in complex acoustic patterns shaped by territory, species recognition, mating behavior, and environmental conditions. To human ears, birdsong may sound spontaneous or musical, but within the ecosystem, it carries precise information. Every call participates in communication, and forests are filled with communication beyond what humans easily perceive. Chemical signaling through roots, pheromone trails left by insects, vibrational signals moving through leaves and stems. Even fungi exchange information through biochemical pathways scientists are only beginning to understand. The forest is alive with conversation, mostly silent to us, yet constant. This hidden exchange contributes to the feeling that forests possess depth beyond immediate visibility. There is always more occurring than perception alone can capture. A quiet clearing may contain thousands of simultaneous interactions. A single tree may support entire worlds of organisms hidden within bark, branches, roots, and surrounding soil. The deeper observation goes, the larger the forest becomes. And perhaps that is why forests never feel entirely exhausted as subjects of exploration. They continue unfolding inward no matter how closely they are studied. Every answer reveals additional layers beneath it. As sunlight spreads farther through the canopy and the coolness of dawn begins slowly warming into day, the forest continues its ancient rhythm once more, breathing moisture into the air, exchanging light for life, and carrying forward the endless conversation between earth, water, atmosphere, and time beneath the waking sky. By mid-morning, the forest has fully entered its daylight rhythm again. Though rhythm in a forest never means uniformity, different parts of the landscape awaken at different speeds. Sunlit ridges warm quickly while shaded ravines remain cool and damp. Insects gather wherever temperature rises first. Birds shift their feeding patterns according to light, movement, and air currents. Even the scent of the forest changes as warmth releases oils from bark, leaves, and soil into the atmosphere. The entire ecosystem responds to sunlight not as a single event, but as a gradual redistribution of energy. And energy is, in many ways, the true architecture of the forest. Every branch, feather, root, and fungal thread participates in its movement. Sunlight enters through leaves, becomes chemical energy through photosynthesis, passes into wood and fruit and seeds, then into insects and animals and microorganisms, before eventually returning to soil and atmosphere. Nothing remains fixed for long. Matter circulates continuously through living forms. A fallen leaf becomes food for fungi. Fungi nourish roots. Roots support future leaves. The cycle folds back into itself endlessly. This constant circulation gives forests a quality that feels almost self-sustaining, though of course they remain deeply connected to wider planetary systems. Rainfall, climate, geology, and sunlight all shape what kinds of forests can exist in particular regions. The towering temperate rainforests of Canada differ profoundly from the dry pine forests of Spain, or the dense tropical jungles of Indonesia. Yet beneath their differences, similar principles repeat: exchange, adaptation, interdependence, time. These principles appear again and again across nearly every forest ecosystem on Earth. And perhaps repetition itself is one of the most calming aspects of nature. Human life often feels fragmented because modern environments constantly interrupt continuity. Forests, by contrast, are built from cycles repeating over immense timescales. Days become seasons, seasons become years, years become ecological successions stretching across centuries. The forest does not fear repetition. It depends upon it. Morning always returns. Leaves always fall. Water always moves downhill. Roots always search toward moisture and stability. There is comfort in systems that continue without needing reinvention. And yet forests are never truly repetitive in detail. No two mornings are identical. Wind changes direction. Rainfall patterns shift. Animals move unpredictably. Light enters through different openings as branches grow and fall over time. The pattern remains stable, while the specifics remain fluid. This balance between structure and variation may explain why forests hold human attention so effectively. The environment remains coherent enough to feel safe, yet variable enough to remain endlessly interesting. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as soft fascination. The mind stays engaged without becoming overstimulated. Attention flows naturally rather than being forced, watching sunlight flicker through leaves, listening to rain move through distant canopy, following the irregular flight path of a butterfly through filtered light. These experiences hold awareness gently, and because of that gentleness, the nervous system often begins recovering from forms of fatigue that are difficult to notice in ordinary life. Mental exhaustion is not always dramatic. Often it accumulates quietly through constant decision-making, background stress, artificial noise, and fragmented attention. Forests counter many of these pressures simultaneously, without requiring conscious effort. The environment itself slows perception. Even movement changes there. People naturally walk more slowly along forest trails. Conversations soften. Long pauses feel comfortable rather than awkward. Silence becomes something inhabited instead of avoided, and silence in forests is never empty. Beneath apparent stillness, layers of sound continue unfolding continuously. Wind across different tree species produces subtly different tones. Leaves rustle with varying textures depending on shape and moisture. Water interacts with stone, wood, and sediment in endlessly changing rhythms. Some acoustic ecologists describe forests as living orchestras, though the comparison is imperfect because forests lack central composition. Their soundscapes emerge spontaneously from interaction rather than design, and perhaps that spontaneity is precisely what makes them feel authentic. Nothing is performing. The forest simply exists. As midday approaches, warmth rises through the understory. Moisture evaporates gradually from moss and soil after the coolness of dawn. Tiny columns of warm air begin moving upward through openings in the canopy, carrying scents and spores into the atmosphere. The forest breathes visibly in these moments, not metaphorically, but physically. Air moves, water rises, light transforms into energy. Everything exchanges continuously. And while these processes unfold, another invisible activity continues deep within the trees themselves: communication. Scientists studying forest ecology have discovered increasingly complex forms of signaling between plants. Trees under insect attack may release airborne chemicals warning nearby trees to increase defensive compounds within their leaves. Root systems connected through fungi may transfer nutrients or biochemical signals across surprisingly large distances. This does not mean forests think like human societies, but it does mean they are more responsive and interconnected than earlier science once believed. A forest is not passive. It perceives, reacts, adapts, and it does so collectively as much as individually. There is something profoundly beautiful about that reality. Beneath the apparent stillness of trunks and branches exists a world of continuous response and relationship. Perhaps humans sense this intuitively even before understanding it scientifically. Old forests often feel inhabited in a way difficult to explain rationally. Not haunted exactly, more present, alive beyond simple visibility. Every fallen log contains hidden activity. Every patch of soil contains billions of living organisms. Every tree participates in exchanges extending beyond itself. The forest exceeds what can be seen directly, and because of that, it encourages humility. No matter how much knowledge humans gather, The full complexity of natural systems remains partially beyond comprehension. There are too many relationships unfolding simultaneously across too many scales: microscopic bacteria shaping soil chemistry, cloud systems influenced by forest transpiration, animal migrations altering seed distribution across continents. The web expands endlessly outward, yet rather than making forests feel chaotic, this complexity often creates the opposite sensation: coherence. Everything belongs somewhere within the larger process. Even decay belongs, even disturbance belongs, even silence belongs. Nothing exists outside the cycle for very long, and perhaps this is one of the deepest comforts forests offer. They reveal a world where change does not necessarily mean disconnection, where endings feed beginnings, where growth emerges slowly from unseen foundations. A sapling beneath dense canopy may wait decades for enough sunlight to accelerate upward after a larger tree falls. The possibility already exists long before it becomes visible. Forests are filled with these delayed transformations, quiet preparations unfolding beneath the surface of perception. And as the day continues forward beneath shifting light and drifting clouds, the forest carries on its endless work without urgency. Roots deepening, leaves turning sunlight into living matter, water rising invisibly through wood, and countless organisms moving through the layered green world beneath the steady passage of time. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, the forest has entered a different kind of stillness, not the cool stillness of night, nor the anticipatory quiet of dawn, but the dense equilibrium of midday. Shadows shorten beneath trees. Air becomes warmer and slower. Insects hum steadily within shafts of light, while distant bird calls grow less frequent in the heat. Everything appears suspended, yet beneath that appearance, enormous amounts of activity continue uninterrupted. Inside every illuminated leaf, photons from the sun are striking chlorophyll molecules, initiating reactions that sustain nearly all complex life on Earth. Water drawn upward from roots combines with carbon dioxide absorbed from the atmosphere, forming sugars that fuel growth throughout the tree. This process is so common it can seem ordinary, but it is one of the most extraordinary transformations in nature. Forests are continuously turning light into living structure. Wood is condensed sunlight. Leaves are temporary engines for capturing energy. Roots are storage systems built from air transformed into matter. Even the oxygen humans breathe is tied intimately to these quiet exchanges happening inside forests every second. And yet trees accomplish this without movement visible to the eye. Their labor is silent, distributed, and patient. Unlike animals, trees do not search outward for resources through motion. Instead, they reshape themselves toward opportunity over time. Branches grow toward openings, roots expand toward moisture, leaves reposition toward light. The forest adapts through gradual architecture. Perhaps this is why trees often appear calm to human beings. Their responses occur at timescales slower than emotional reaction. Storms may bend them violently, but afterward they continue growing according to the same underlying principles as before. There is no panic in a forest, only adjustment. And this adjustment extends across entire ecosystems. During periods of drought, some trees reduce growth to conserve resources. Certain species shed leaves earlier. Fungal activity changes according to soil moisture. Animal movement patterns shift toward water sources or cooler shaded areas. The system responds collectively without requiring centralized control. This decentralized balance has fascinated scientists studying complexity and resilience. Forests demonstrate how stable systems can emerge from countless independent interactions rather than rigid hierarchy. Each organism follows local conditions. Together, they create larger order. The same principle appears throughout nature. Schools of fish, flocks of birds, colonies of ants. Yet forests express it at extraordinary scale and duration. Some ecological relationships persist for centuries, shaping landscapes slowly through accumulated interaction. A tree may alter soil chemistry around its roots over decades. That soil influences which fungi thrive nearby. The fungi affect future plant growth. The plants reshape moisture retention and shade patterns. Small changes echo outward through time, and forests hold those echoes physically. In certain old-growth woodlands, scientists can trace ecological histories through subtle structural clues. Moss distribution on rocks may indicate long-term moisture stability. Tree ring patterns reveal drought cycles centuries old. Soil layers preserve charcoal from fires long before written history. The forest becomes a living archive. But unlike human archives, it is not organized around events alone. It records processes, slow accumulation, gradual erosion, incremental adaptation. Human history often emphasizes dramatic moments because they are easier to notice. Forests remind us that most real transformation happens quietly over time. A canyon formed by persistent water, a mature ecosystem emerging from bare ground, a sapling becoming ancient wood ring by ring. Nothing sudden, yet everything profound. Perhaps this perspective changes how the mind experiences its own passage through time. Inside forests, urgency begins to loosen slightly. Thoughts stretch outward into longer rhythms. The pressure to resolve everything immediately becomes less convincing beneath organisms that measure life in centuries. Even light reinforces this slower perspective. Midday sunlight filtering through leaves creates shifting mosaics across the forest floor. No pattern lasts more than a few moments before wind alters it. Yet the overall atmosphere remains continuous. Constant change within underlying stability. The same balance appears in nearly every aspect of forest life. Streams alter course gradually while still remaining recognizable rivers. Trees shed leaves yearly while remaining the same organisms. Animal populations fluctuate while ecosystems endure. Identity in forests is fluid without becoming chaotic. And perhaps humans find that reassuring because human lives are similarly shaped by change within continuity. Memories shift, cells regenerate, beliefs evolve, yet some deeper sense of self persists through these transformations. Forests externalize that truth physically. Nothing there remains identical to what it was before, yet the forest continues being itself. As midday heat deepens, certain sections of the woodland become remarkably quiet. Many animals reduce movement to conserve energy. Birdsong fades intermittently. Wind may drop entirely beneath dense canopy, leaving the air almost motionless. In these moments, the smallest sounds gain significance. The ticking movement of insects through dry leaves, a distant branch settling under its own weight. Water dripping slowly from moss after morning moisture has not yet fully evaporated. Silence in forests is rarely absolute. It is textured, and within that texture, human awareness often sharpens naturally. Details that would disappear beneath urban noise become noticeable again. Tiny shifts in air temperature, variations in scent between shaded and sunlit areas, the changing density of light beneath different tree species. The forest trains attention gently, not through instruction, but through invitation. Nothing forces observation there. The environment simply rewards it. A person sitting quietly long enough in one place may begin noticing astonishing levels of hidden activity. Ants following chemical trails beneath fallen bark, beetles emerging from cracks in dead wood, tiny spiders rebuilding damaged webs between grasses. Entire dramas unfold continuously at scales most people rarely perceive. And perhaps this is another reason forests feel emotionally restorative. They pull awareness outward from repetitive internal loops and reconnect it to external patterns of life. The mind becomes observational rather than self-enclosed. This shift can feel subtle at first, but over time, it changes the emotional atmosphere of thought itself. Worries lose some intensity when surrounded by systems operating at vastly different scales of time and complexity. The forest does not solve human problems. It contextualizes them. A tree standing for 400 years has already endured storms, droughts, insect outbreaks, lightning strikes, winters beyond counting. Its survival is not based upon avoiding difficulty entirely, but upon remaining adaptable through change. Perhaps people sense this instinctively in old forests: endurance without rigidity, strength without aggression, persistence without hurry. As afternoon slowly approaches once more, Light begins its gradual descent across the canopy. Heat softens slightly. Wind may return in gentle movements through upper branches. Shadows lengthen almost invisibly across roots and stones, and beneath it all, the endless exchanges continue. Water rising, leaves breathing, fungi weaving through soil, seeds waiting quietly for conditions not yet arrived. The forest carries forward its ancient conversation between sunlight, earth, air, and time, an immeasurably old process unfolding with complete patience beneath the living green canopy of the world.